Okay, so if you have come this far, then we have done the rigid body simulation for our planet here. And what we can do is now go ahead, add some lights into the scene and render this shot out. So we are going to be rendering the scenes every now and then during production. So as mentioned before, we would be exporting all of these renders into Adobe After Effects for our final compositing. Okay, so without further delay, let's go ahead and look at how we can render the shots out. Okay, so to begin with, what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set up a few lights in my scene. So the way I'm gonna do this is, first let's go ahead and go into standard, and I'm gonna set up an Omni, so it's gonna act as our sun. So you can hit the G key to enable and disable the grid. So I'm gonna use the grid for now, and I'm gonna create a light. So again, let's just move this light into space somewhere like so. So really, depending on how you want your shot to look, you can place the lights accordingly, and you can also render the shot every now and then to see how the effect looks. So yeah, I'm gonna call this Omni as sunlight, and I'm going to go into enabling the shadows and light, color, and intensity. I'm going to give it a little orangish shade to make it more sunny, right? And I'm going to hide my grid. Now if I go ahead and frame into my planet and render this shot, I'm going to be able to see how my light affects the scene. Great, kind of looks good. Okay, and if I move to a couple of frames and then if I again render the shot, let's see how that looks. Excellent. So you can see how the light now affects our object, and I've also we enable shadows. You can see that the shadows are kind of visible in when you look at a couple of these pieces. Now something else that's missing is some motion blur. So in order to give the motion blur, I'm going to select all my objects in the scene. So this can be done by hitting Control A on the keyboard, and then I'm going to right click and choose object properties. Now here for motion blur multiplier, for motion blur I'm going to say image and leave the multiplier to 1, and I'm going to click on OK. Now again, if I render the scene, you should see some nice motion blur in our shot here. Great. So you can see there's a very nice blurring that happens now in our scene. It looks very nice, right? So another thing that I want to do is add one more light. Now this light is going to be inside our planet, right? So I'm going to center it to 0 on the x-axis, 0 on y, and 0 on z. If you remember that we had created our planet in the center grid, so basically this light is going to be right in the center of our planet. Now I'm going to go into modify for this. I'm again going to enable shadows, and I am going to change the color of this to something a little more intense, maybe a little orange, kind of making it look like, you know, there's some fire or something happening. You know, basically the color of the planet's core, right? So let's kind of go into a kind of a shot here and render this out to see how it looks. Now again, the more lights you add into the scene, the more shadows that needs to be calculated. So it can really take some time by when you start adding a lot of lights in your scene. Now that looks pretty nice to start with, and I'm very happy with the results so far. So what I'm going to do is I'm also going to frame in on my shot. So it really depends on how or what angle you want to look at this explosion from. So I think I'm pretty happy with this angle. So there's some very good shadowing that happens from this angle, and you can also see that internal light kind of seeping out through the explosion. So I'm just going to frame into the shot, and with my keyboard I'm going to hit Control C. So C for Charlie, right? So what this does is automatically going to create a camera, uh, keeping the current frame as view, right? So it's automatically going to create a camera for me. Now to this camera, I'm not going to make any changes. I'm just going to leave it at that. And I'm going to come in here and click this little plus sign on my viewport, and I'm going to say Configure Viewports. And here I'm going to select Save Frames and say Show Save Frames in Active View, and then click on Apply. Now this is going to give us an idea of how this shot is going to look while it is being rendered. And now I can go ahead and turn off my grid and hit Control S probably, right? So this shot is pretty much ready to be rendered right now. Excellent. You can see that the particles, the pieces kind of rotate and move very nicely. You can even render out one of these last frames to see how they look. Excellent. Kind of looks pretty good actually. Okay, so I'm going to go into rendering, render setup. Gonna refresh my slider. I'm going to say active segments, active time segments. I'm going to leave my rendering resolution or the output size to 1080, 1920 by 1080. I'm going to select files for render output, and then I'm going to navigate into the directory wherever I want to save this to. So you could put the file in anywhere you want. So it's basically going to kind of create a path for where it's going to save the rendered out files. So one good method is when you're saving these files, right? I'm just gonna go ahead and type in a name here. I'm gonna say project Planet Explosion object pass, and I'm gonna give an extension of .png, and then when I hit save, it's gonna give me this option of PNG configuration. I'm gonna leave alpha channel on, and I'm gonna click on OK. Now that's gonna create a nice transparent background for me. So when I finally move the rendered image into Adobe After Effects, I would be able to easily composite the fire and the shock waves onto this shot. So go ahead and at this point in time hit the render button and render out the shots. So it's going to take a while, so don't forget to go grab yourself a nice cup of coffee, and by the time you come back, hopefully it should have been done.